Right, so I wouldn't mind doing some reaction content. I want to watch another Easter video. That'll make some good content on my second channel. I love Easter videos. They're really good, actually. I love the World War II ones. I personally find these history videos the most interesting because they're very visual, where I feel like some of the other history YouTubers are just a little bit dry. I feel like they're not as interesting. The one that I find the most interesting is Barbarossa. Let's watch that one. Anyway, this is the one we're going to watch. It is about the Eastern Front in 1941.
Europe, summer 1941. Germany had secured most of Central and Western Europe, with only Great Britain remaining defiant on the islands. The only potential threat to Germany in Europe was its former ally, the Soviet Union. In order to break the stalemate with Britain and make Germany's strategic position indisputable, Hitler decided to cripple the military capabilities of the Soviet Union and seize its natural resources. Germany planned to achieve this goal by capturing most of the European part of the Soviet Union before the onset of winter 1941. The main attack would take place in the center and be directed towards Moscow.
Okay, I just want to let you stop for a second and just think about this plan. Think about this plan here. This plan is unbelievably ambitious. Think about this. So we've got Germany here, then we've got Poland here, and then we've got France here. Now, don't get me wrong. I understand about victory sickness, the idea that if you're winning a lot, you tend to be reckless and make lots of mistakes. But look at the amount of this basically is almost not more than double the amount of conquest that they did in Europe. How unbelievably ambitious is this?
With auxiliary attacks in the north and south. By the middle of June 1941, the Germans had almost completed the preparations and the invasion was about to begin. Meanwhile, the Soviet forces were unaware of what was coming and were ill-prepared to resist the German invasion. First, we'll look at the southern sector. The Soviets had deployed their strongest units in the south, having 1,200,000 men between...
I'm disappointed there's not an option in Hoi 4, No Step Back, for you to make a decision or go for a national focus that basically means that the Soviet Union will fight down to the very last city. You know, like Republican Spain or nationalist Spain in the Spanish Civil War, they will fight down to the very, very last victory point. I am so disappointed that that does not exist for the Soviet Union. I don't want to talk about balance. I just want to talk about the idea that, like, the Soviet Union permanently is the thorn in the side of Hitler for almost forever, unless he conquers the entirety of almost the Asian continent. How unbelievably awesome would that? Why didn't they put that in the game? That would have been so cool.
Between the Pripyat marshes and the Black Sea, they were to be confronted by the Army Group South that was of roughly the same strength. The first objective of the Axis troops...
I understand it's difficult. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that every game will result in conquest of Barbarossa. I think it would be kind of cool, the idea of Russia being a permanent thorn in the side of Hitler, and it would be like eventually his downfall. Maybe you could introduce some kind of decision for Germany. If he does manage to capitulate the Soviet Union, he gains like 30 compliance for free throughout the entirety of the Soviet Union, as like you've demoralized the Russian people or something. I don't know, something like that. Something to balance it out, you know.
Troops was securing the western Ukraine. On June 22nd, the invasion began. The Soviets immediately gathered their armed forces and met the German spearhead with a massive counterattack in the area of Dubno and Brody. But due to the lack of combat readiness of the units involved, it failed, and the Soviets lost most of their tanks. The German advance continued, and this created a threat of encirclement to the Soviet troops in the south, and they had to be withdrawn from the exposed position. After the main attack had tied down the Soviet reserves, the Axis forces in Romania joined the offensive. The main spearhead now made a dash towards the east, and this made Soviet command think that the main German effort was directed towards Kiev. However, the Germans had stuck to their original plan and turned south. When the Soviets
look at all these divisions, guys.
realized the German intentions, it was already too late to withdraw their forces, and the Germans encircled and destroyed many of the Soviet formations near the town of Uman. The Soviets now abandoned western Ukraine.
Okay, I don't want to give spoilers or anything. I'm sorry for all the pausing, but you know one thing you find from after you've watched this video? How many troops the Soviet Union could lose, but then they still had fighting capabilities. It blows my fudging mind.
And retreated to the eastern bank of the river Dnieper. They deployed the first wave of freshly mobilized troops
100,000,
to establish a strong
60,000
defense on the river line
POWs.
and also cling to the port of Odessa. At the same time, operations were being carried out in the north, where 1.5 million German soldiers from army groups north and center were facing 1 million Soviet soldiers. In the beginning of the invasion, the Army Group Center was to encircle Soviet forces at the border and then advance towards Smolensk and Moscow. Meanwhile, Army Group North was to advance directly towards Leningrad, threatening to trap the Soviet forces between them and the sea. On June 22nd,
You think about it, the Baltic states, which have only recently been annexed, they would have been more favorable to a German invasion at that particular time as well. So that would have been seen as land. As they were liberating it, they were less likely to suffer from, I don't know, resistance in those regions.
Second, the Germans attacked. The Soviet Western Front was deployed forward, and during the first days of the war, the German forces encircled most of its formations near the towns of Bialystok and Minsk. In the Baltics, the Soviet counterattacks were defeated in the Battle of Raseiniai, and then they attempted to pull back and establish a defensive line on Daugava River.
Riga.
But the Germans reached the river before them and pushed onwards, threatening the Soviet units in the west with encirclement.
288,000 POWs.
Encircling the Soviet Western Front, and its infantry units.
I got the idea. I don't know if you watched one of my older videos, but I said in my older videos, it would be really cool whenever you make an encirclement and over a run, it would pop up on screen how much manpower is encircled. And I got it from this video. How cool is that when you see how many people have got encircled? It's insane.
Began to reduce the pockets, while its armored forces advanced eastwards almost unopposed. The Soviets attempted to plug the gap by deploying most of their pre-war reserves to counter them, but it was not enough, and as the German offensive continued, their armor broke through the Soviet lines and trapped these units near Smolensk. By that time, the first wave of Soviet mobilization was complete, and the Soviets used these formations to block further German advance and attempted to free the encircled troops. However, the performance of these newly created units was lackluster, and they were unable to liberate the pocket. The Germans managed to close it up.
309,000.
The Germans had gained the upper hand in the central part of the front, and now they were faced with two options. They could continue the push towards Moscow immediately, or secure the flanks of Army Group Center first, and then continue the offensive eastwards.
You know what makes me wonder, like, how effective would an early capture of Moscow actually been? So from a Hoi 4 perspective, you understand there's a lot of railways that come off Moscow. Would of taking the central line of the Moscow Railway and all the connections to it made a difference to the supply routes throughout the entire country? Because I eventually imagine they would lose those railway lines, but they would obviously use railway lines that are further and deeper into the country to reinforce. But it makes me think, you know, like the actual impact of like a central supply hub that Moscow actually was.
They decided to do the latter, and the armored formations of Army Group Center were sent to aid neighboring army groups. During this time, battles had been raging in the north, where Army Group North had failed to pull out large encirclements, and their progress was slowed down by the Soviet counterattacks and bad infrastructure. Nevertheless, they were making slow but steady progress, and after securing their left flank, they reached the approaches to Leningrad. When the help from Army Group Center arrived, they were able to perform the final push and cut off the land-based communications
20K.
to the city. Further north, Finland had entered the war against the Soviet Union on June 25th, and the Finnish troops took advantage of the...
I always thought to myself, like, why didn't they, like the Germans, equipped the Finns more so their offensive capabilities would have been a lot better? But then the Finns had a lot of issues. The Finns, their country is vastly underpopulated, so their ability to mobilize would probably be very limited. And top that off as well, like, I guess it would have looked really bad from a Soviet perspective, like all of a sudden, like the German soldiers in Finland, I suppose.
Soviet defeats by taking back the lands lost in the Winter War. After that, they established forward defensive positions between the lakes. Even further north, the Finnish and German troops attempted to capture the Soviet port city of Murmansk.
Finnish and
cut
German
the Murmansk
troops.
railway in order to sever the Allied supply route to the Soviet Union. However, their attacks became bogged down in the rough terrain short of their objectives. The front became...
You can actually see the railway lines here from the north and south. So what they're trying to do here is snip this railway line here to isolate this northern sector.
Became static. Meanwhile, the other armored units of the Army Group Center were sent to help Army Group South. The Soviets had anticipated that the Germans would continue their attack towards Moscow and concentrated their troops on this direction, which allowed the German armored formations to push back the weaker Soviet units on their southern flank. The German advance southwards forced the Soviets to abandon their forward positions in the Pripyat marshes to shorten their line. In Ukraine, the Soviet troops were occupying a strong defensive position with their flanks resting on the Dnieper River in the west and south and the marshes in the north. Yet, the panzers from Army Group Center were bypassed.
Oh, that was the other point I was going to mention as well. It's not a matter of like supplying lots of ammunition, weapons, and manpower to the Finns. It's also the fact that the supply within those like really high Arctic regions was horrendous as well. So it's a classic Hoi 4 thing. But not only are you attacking, but you're building railroads as you go, or supply or infrastructure.
Passing the marshes from the east and advanced into the Soviet rear. The Soviets thought that the German spearhead was overextended and could be contained. However, unbeknownst to them, the armored formations of the Army Group South had secretly crossed the Dnieper from the south into a German breachhead and now broke through towards north to link up with the spearhead. As the groups met, most of the Soviet units in the central Ukraine became encircled. 750,000 men were trapped in the pocket. When the pocket had been liquidated,
submit to that to Reddit, eh, boys? Huh?
Had been severely weakened. After these operations, the flanks of Army Group Center was...
I want to know about Odessia. Can you see Odessia in the south here? Why has this pocket been closed? That frustrates me.
After these operations, the flanks of Army Group Center were secure, but now the Germans didn't have enough time to reach the objectives set in the beginning of the campaign, and they decided...
If it was classic Hoi 4, that one tiny little pocket in the bottom would have like 50 divisions defending it. God damn it. Hoi 4 front lines. Come on.
Go for more limited goals. In order
Rommel's
to
general
they began
grinding.
a full-scale attack along the whole front. In the south, the Soviet resistance had been crippled with the recent encirclement, and this allowed the Germans to carry out another encirclement, trapping part of the Soviet forces on the coast of the Black Sea. Then they pushed onwards and established their control over the resource-rich areas of the eastern Ukraine and conquered the Crimean Peninsula, with Soviets abandoning Odessa but clinging on to the port of Sevastopol. At the same time, the German forces were pursuing their objectives in the north.
Hang on, his pronunciation of Sevastopol.
At the same time,
hang on.
Soviets abandoning Odessa but clinging on to the port of Sevastopol.
Sevastopol. I thought it was Sevastopol. Have I been saying it wrong all along and you guys have not been correcting me? Oh, I'm so embarrassed.
At the same time,
he's Estonian,
the
right?
Forces were pursuing their objectives in the north. Their goal was to sever the remaining supply route to Leningrad and link up with the Finnish forces. The initial advance was successful and reached its first goal by cutting the railway line supplying the city. The main German effort was in the center. All this time the Soviets had anticipated an attack on Moscow and had deployed 1,250,000 mobilized troops to the sector. During the German operations on the flanks, they had even somewhat managed to push Army Group Center back to improve their...
Wouldn't this been the ultimate poker face? Like this whole time they're given this idea they're going to push for Moscow while simultaneously having their best tank and motorized divisions in the north and south constantly pushing towards like Leningrad and Stalingrad. Wouldn't that have been the ultimate dupe? Like, got him. we had the shit troops in the middle. We thought you were going to go for Moscow. Got him.
Defensive perimeter, but by the end of September, the German armor had finally returned to the center and proceeded to carry out a new attack. Once again, near the towns of Vyazma and
damn, just slicing through them.
This resulted in halving the Soviet strength on the front. After reducing the pockets, the Germans closed their distance to Moscow. Then they attempted to encircle Moscow with a two-pronged attack, but by that time the long advance had exhausted their offensive capabilities and the weather had become severely cold. The Soviets managed to halt their advance, and although they...
Okay, I'm really sorry for the Hoi 4 comparisons here, but these guys are pushing without a supply depot and railways, okay? And they're pushing with their own independent supply. That will be an absolute nightmare, okay?
Didn't have large
pocket too big
in numbers. The Soviet proficiency in winter combat allowed them to carry out a counterattack. The Germans were forced to abandon their vulnerable forward positions on the flanks and pulled back in order to shorten the front line.
Encircled.
During the retreat, they had to abandon some of their heavy equipment. At the same time, the German attempt to cut off Leningrad had also failed, and they had to retreat to their starting positions, and the supply line to Leningrad was restored. In the south, the German advance was also checked by the Soviets, forcing the Germans to abandon their forward positions in Rostov. The first year of the war was over. The Soviets had stopped the Germans far from their initial goals, but at a great cost to their own military capabilities. The Red Army had been decimated, and it would take a year or more to fully rebuild and re-equip the army. The Germans wanted to use this window of opportunity and were sending most of their available forces to the Eastern Front to deliver a knockout punch in the following year. 1942 would be the decisive year of the war.
Damn. See, if I was Hitler, this is what I would have done differently. I'm joking, that's a joke. I find it very hard with how active the KGB were. NKVD, that's right. Yeah, NKVD. I find it very hard to believe that they had no idea this German invasion was coming. I think the honest truth is that I think both sides knew that this war was inevitable, and it's just Germans were like, we're not waiting a year for this, let's get this done now.